It was early in the morning when rangers at Canyonlands National Park spotted a car parked strangely along the side of a rocky trail. Something about it felt wrong. Inside, they found a little boy, only 6 years old, slumped over and not moving. Panic filled the air. Emergency teams rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. The boy was gone. Outside the car, his mother lay lifeless on the rugged ground. The park, usually quiet and serene, had suddenly turned into a scene of horror. How could this peaceful place hide such a tragic event? The shocking discovery left authorities and families across Colorado and Utah in disbelief. Who could have imagined that a simple trip into nature would end in such heartbreak? And why had this mother, who seemed so ordinary, been involved in something so unthinkable? People began asking questions. How did they get all the way to Utah from their home in Colorado? What happened inside that car before anyone knew they were missing? The answers were not immediately clear. All that was certain was the devastating sight of a mother and her young son, their lives abruptly ended. Park officials cordoned off the area, and investigators started piecing together the final hours of their lives. Each step into the case uncovered more chilling possibilities. Was this a terrible accident or something darker? As the morning sun rose higher, the truth began to take shape. The boy had been killed, and the mother's death was believed to be a suicide. Authorities described it as a murder-suicide, but the reasons behind it were a mystery. Friends and family were stunned. Neighbors in Colorado remembered seeing a happy family, nothing to hint at this tragedy. Social media lit up with shock and grief as people tried to understand how such a thing could happen. The national park, often a place for adventure and quiet reflection, had become the site of a nightmare. But the story didn't begin there. To understand the heartbreak, you have to go back a few days. Days before the tragic discovery, the mother and her son had been seen at home, getting ready for a trip. Friends said she seemed stressed, but no one imagined it would lead to death. Her little boy, full of energy and curiosity, was excited for the drive. What drove them so far from home, and why did things end so tragically? The clues were hidden, but investigators were determined to find them. As the day went on, questions multiplied. Who would have thought that a simple car parked along a trail could become the center of a national investigation? Every rock, every turn of the path seemed to hold secrets, and even as authorities started to examine the scene, the most important answers, the reasons behind the mother's actions, remained unknown. The mystery deepened. What had happened in the hours leading up to this tragic morning? How did a trip that was meant to be ordinary turn into a horror story that shook 2 states? The answers were hidden, waiting for those willing to follow the trail of clues. And just when it seemed like the story had reached its peak of horror, investigators uncovered something even more shocking that would change everything they thought they knew. The investigation revealed a chilling detail. The car the mother had driven into the Utah park wasn't just abandoned, it had been parked in a spot where few people ever stopped. Investigators found signs that she had planned this trip carefully. Maps, directions, and a list of supplies indicated she knew exactly where she was going. But why? And what was going through her mind as she drove hundreds of miles from Colorado to a quiet national park, far away from anyone who could help? Friends and neighbors back home described the mother as quiet but loving. She doted on her little boy and often shared stories of their adventures together. They played at the park, baked together, and laughed like any other family. No one could understand what had led her to the desert that day. Was it a sudden decision, or had she been planning this for weeks? Investigators sifted through messages and phone records, hoping to find a clue, but the answers were still frustratingly out of reach. The boy, only 6 years old, had no way to defend himself or explain what happened. His small life, full of dreams and laughter, had been taken too soon.
People struggled to imagine what had happened inside that car. Some thought she may have tried to keep him safe in her own way, though tragically wrong. Others wondered if anger, fear, or sadness had taken over her mind in a way that no one could predict. It was a mystery that left everyone feeling helpless. Meanwhile, the quiet national park had turned into a scene of constant activity. Rangers and police combed the area for any evidence, footprints, belongings, or signs of a struggle. The rugged cliffs and winding trails that once seemed peaceful now held secrets that only investigators could uncover. Journal entries, photographs, and the mother's personal notes hinted at stress, worry, and perhaps desperation. Each piece of evidence painted a more complex picture of a woman caught in a storm of emotions, her love for her son mixed tragically with a darkness she couldn't escape.
As authorities dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. She had recently faced pressures that weighed heavily on her, but the exact triggers remained unclear. There were calls for help that went unanswered, and warnings from friends and family that may have come too late. People began to ask, could anyone have stopped this tragedy? Could someone have seen the signs before it was too late? Just when it seemed like the story was fully coming into focus, investigators discovered another shocking detail. Something about the mother's final hours suggested that she wanted her son to remember her, or at least remember their bond, in some way that only she could control. It was heartbreaking and confusing, adding layers to a tragedy that already shook communities in Colorado and Utah. And yet, the most haunting questions remained unanswered. What exactly happened in the car that morning? Did the boy know what was happening? Could anyone have changed the outcome? The answers were buried in the silence of the park, in the shadows of the cliffs where the mother and son had taken their final journey. And just as authorities began to uncover more pieces of the story, an even more disturbing detail emerged. Something that would shock everyone following the case and change how people understood this tragedy. The deeper investigators dug, the more heart-wrenching the story became. They discovered that the mother's journey to Canyonlands National Park was not just a random trip. It had been planned as a final act. Notes, maps, and messages hinted at a woman struggling with overwhelming emotions, feeling trapped and desperate. But the most chilling detail was the realization that her young son had no way to escape the danger. He was completely dependent on her, trusting her to keep him safe. Authorities pieced together the final hours. They believed she drove for hours through the night, the little boy asleep or confused in the back seat, unaware of the danger. When they reached the remote park, she parked the car in a quiet area away from other visitors, far from anyone who might intervene. The rugged cliffs and winding trails that had once been places of adventure became the stage for a tragedy that no one could have imagined. Neighbors and friends were stunned. People remembered a loving mother who shared pictures of her son smiling, laughing, and exploring the world. No one imagined that behind those smiles, she might have been battling invisible struggles. Some wondered if there were signs they had missed, messages, behaviors, or moments of sadness. Others felt helpless, wishing they could have reached out and prevented the worst. As investigators examined the scene, they confirmed what many had feared. The boy's death had been caused by intentional harm, while the mother's death was a suicide. The evidence painted a heartbreaking picture of a family torn apart by forces that no one could fully understand. The park, normally a place of wonder and escape, had become the site of the unimaginable. Rangers and law enforcement officers spoke of the silence of the desert, how the empty trails and cliffs seemed to hold the story of that tragic day. Public reaction was immediate and emotional. Social media filled with messages of grief, disbelief, and questions about what could have been done to prevent such tragedies. People shared memories of their own families, moments with their children, and the sudden realization of how fragile life can be. The story spread across Colorado and Utah, leaving communities searching for answers, comfort, and hope that such events could somehow be prevented in the future. Yet even as the investigation wrapped up, some questions lingered. Why had she felt there was no other way? How could a mother who loved her child decide to end both of their lives? Experts later explained that cases like this often involve extreme stress, mental health struggles, and feelings of hopelessness, but that explanation offered little comfort to those left behind. In the end, the story of the Colorado mother and her 6-year-old son remains a painful reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to reach out when someone seems in distress. Canyonlands National Park returned to its usual quiet, but the memory of that day and the boy and his mother lingers. Their story is a tragic echo in the desert, a cautionary tale for parents, friends, and communities. And as the sun sets over the cliffs, the questions remain. Could someone have intervened? Could this tragedy have been prevented? The silence of the park answers nothing, leaving only the memory of lives lost too soon and the haunting thought of what really happened that night.